The November rain drummed against the windows of the suburban Chicago home, each droplet racing down the glass like the thoughts racing through Marcus Thompson's mind. He sat in his beat-up Honda Civic outside his aunt's house, watching warm, yellow light spill from the windows onto the wet driveway. Through the kitchen window, he could see his extended family moving around, preparing for what would undoubtedly be another awkward Thanksgiving dinner. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, his calloused hands betraying the tension he tried to hide. At 28, he looked older than his years, weathered in a way that desk jobs and college parties couldn't explain. His brown hair was kept short, military precise, though no one in his family knew why. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights that had nothing to do with late-night gaming or partying, as his cousins assumed. The front door opened, and his younger sister Emma emerged, her red hair bright against the gray afternoon. She spotted his car immediately and jogged over, her face lighting up with genuine relief. Emma was the only person in the family who never looked at him with disappointment or confusion. "Thank God you actually came," she said as he rolled down the window. "I was starting to think you'd bail again." Marcus managed a small smile. "You know, I wouldn't leave you to face Uncle Richard alone." Emma's expression darkened at the mention of their uncle. He's already started with the comments about young people these days and lack of ambition. Mom tried to change the subject, but you know how he gets. Marcus did know. Richard Thompson, their father's older brother, had built a successful construction company from the ground up. He was the family's self-appointed patriarch, the one who'd helped everyone financially at some point, and he never let anyone forget it. To Richard, success was measured in dollars earned, houses owned, and status achieved. Marcus, who worked occasional odd jobs and lived in a studio apartment, was a constant source of embarrassment to him. "Just promise me you won't let him get to you," Emma said, her green eyes serious. "Whatever he says tonight, remember that some of us know you're going through something, even if you won't tell us what." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the weight of secrets, of missions he couldn't discuss, of friends who wouldn't be coming home to their own Thanksgiving tables. The Medal of Honor hidden in his apartment, never displayed, never mentioned. The nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat and reaching for weapons that weren't there. "I'll be fine," he lied. It's the same lie he'd been telling for months. They walked to the house together, Emma chattering about her nursing school finals and her new boyfriend. Marcus listened, grateful for the normalcy of her voice, the way she could fill silence without expecting him to contribute much. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing, cinnamon and apple pie, normal Thanksgiving smells that should have been comforting but instead reminded him of everything he'd missed while deployed. The living room was packed with familiar faces. His parents, David and Sarah, looked up from the couch where they were watching football with his cousin Jake. His Aunt Linda rushed over to hug him, her perfume overwhelming and her smile too bright. "Marcus, oh honey, you look so thin. Are you eating enough? You know, you can always come by for dinner." "I'm fine, Aunt Linda, thank you." Uncle Richard emerged from the kitchen carrying a beer, his presence filling the room like storm clouds gathering. At 55, he was still an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your own worth. His eyes swept over Marcus with barely concealed disapproval. "Look what the cat dragged in," Richard said, his voice carrying just enough humor to make it technically a joke. "Marcus, good to see you. Finally decided to show up? We were starting to think you'd forgotten you had family." The room fell into that particular kind of silence that happens when everyone senses conflict brewing. Marcus felt every eye on him, waiting for his response. He'd learned long ago that engaging with Richard only made things worse. "Good to see you too, Uncle Richard. Still working at that garage?" Richard pressed, settling into his favorite armchair. "What's it been? 6 months now? It usually takes you about that long to find a reason to quit." The garage was actually a veteran-owned auto repair shop where he helped out when he could, though he'd never explained that distinction to his family. The owner, a former Marine named Tony, understood when Marcus disappeared for weeks at a time without explanation. Understood the importance of keeping certain things quiet. Something like that, Marcus replied. Emma shot him a warning look, but he was already retreating into himself, becoming the quiet, directionless nephew that everyone expected him to be. It was easier than explaining why he couldn't hold down a regular job, why he sometimes disappeared for months, why he flinched at unexpected noises and struggled to sleep in soft beds. Dinner was called, and they gathered around Linda's dining room table, laden with traditional dishes and family recipes. The conversation flowed around Marcus like water around a stone, discussions of promotions and house purchases, vacation plans and children's achievements. Jake talked about his recent promotion to regional manager. Emma shared her excitement about finishing nursing school. Even their youngest cousin, 16-year-old Melissa, had news about her acceptance to her first-choice college. Marcus ate quietly, responding when directly addressed, but otherwise letting the familiar feeling of otherness wash over him. He was here, but not here, present, but absent, family, but separate. The weight of his secrets pressed down on him like deep water, threatening to drown him in plain sight. "So, Marcus," Richard said during a lull in conversation, his voice cutting through the warm family atmosphere like a blade. "Still living in that shoebox apartment downtown? Still no girlfriend, no real job, no plans for the future?" The table went quiet again. Marcus could feel his mother's concerned gaze, his father's embarrassment, Emma's rising anger. This was the moment he'd been dreading, the reason he'd almost stayed home. "I'm doing fine," he said quietly. "Are you, though?" Richard leaned back in his chair, warming to his subject. "Because, from where I sit, it looks like you're just floating through life with no direction. No ambition, no sense of responsibility. Hell, you're 28 years old and you can't even afford to bring a dish to family dinner." Richard, his mother, started, but Richard held up a hand. "No, Sarah, someone needs to say it." His family has been tiptoeing around Marcus for years, making excuses for him, bailing him out financially. But at some point, we need to face facts. He turned his cold gaze back to Marcus. "You're just dead weight." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Dead weight. If only they knew about the weight he actually carried, the weight of classified missions in hostile territories. The weight of decisions that meant life or death for his team. The weight of secrets that could never be shared. The weight of teammates who hadn't made it home, whose families would never know the true nature of their sacrifice. He felt something crack inside his chest. It's not from his uncle's cruelty, but from the terrible irony of it all. Here he was, a decorated Navy SEAL who had risked everything for his country, being called dead weight by a man who had never served anyone but himself. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Marcus could hear the rain still pattering. Against the windows, the distant sound of a football game from the TV in the living room. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Normal sounds for a normal family gathering, except nothing about this felt normal anymore. He started to push back from the table, ready to leave as he had so many times before, ready to disappear into the night and avoid the awkward aftermath. But before he could stand, Emma's chair scraped against the floor. Emma Thompson had always been protective of her older brother. But as she watched Marcus absorb their uncle's cruel words like physical blows, something inside her snapped. She stood so abruptly that her chair nearly tipped backward, her hands trembling with a fury that had been building for months. "How dare you," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Richard looked up from his turkey, surprised by the interruption. "Excuse me? How dare you sit there and call him dead weight?" Emma's voice was rising now, carrying across the suddenly silent dining room. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Emma, sweetheart," their mother began, but Emma wasn't finished. "No, Mom. I'm tired of watching this happen. I'm tired of watching Marcus sit here and take this abuse because he's too honorable to defend himself." She turned to face Richard directly, her green eyes blazing. "You want to know why he can't? Tell tell you about his job? You want to know why he disappears for months at a time? You want to know why he doesn't talk about his plans or his girlfriend or his future? Marcus felt ice in his veins. Emma don't, but Emma was beyond stopping. Years of watching her brother struggle in silence. Years of seeing him carry burdens he couldn't share. Years of knowing there was more to his story than anyone realized had all led to this moment. "He's a Navy SEAL," she shouted, the words exploding into the room like a grenade. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every face around the table went slack with shock. Forks clattered against plates. Someone's wine glass tipped over red. Liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled blood. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick louder in the sudden silence. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "What did you say? You heard me?" Emma said, her voice now steady with conviction. "Marcus is a Navy SEAL. He has been for 6 years. Those months when he disappears, he's on classified missions that he can't tell us about. Those odd jobs he works, they're cover for when he's between deployments. That shoebox apartment, it's because he sends most of his military pay to help other veterans and their families." Marcus felt the room spinning around him. Constructed cover story, the protective barrier he'd built between his two worlds, was crumbling in real time. The weight of exposure felt somehow heavier than the weight of secrets. "That's impossible," Richard stammered. "If he was in the military, we would know. There would be ... ceremonies or uniforms or ... or what?" Emma turned on him with fresh fury. "You think every military family has flag ceremonies in their backyard? You think everyone in special operations announces it to the world? Do you have any idea what ops means? What operational security requires?" Jake was staring at Marcus with new eyes. "Is this true? Are you really?" Marcus met his cousin's gaze and saw something he'd never seen before. Maybe. Even fear. It was the same look civilians always got when they learned the truth, and it was exactly why he'd hidden it for so long. "Emma, you shouldn't have." "Yes, I should have." Emma whirled to face him. "I should have said something months ago. Do you know what it's been like watching Uncle Richard tear you down at every family gathering? Watching Mom and Dad worry that you're lost or directionless? Watching everyone think you're just some kind of failure when the truth is... double quotes. Her voice broke. "When the truth is you're the bravest person I know." Linda was crying now, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Oh my God, Marcus. All this time... All this time," Emma continued, "he's been serving his country. He's been in places you can't even imagine. Doing things he can never tell us about. Sacrificing everything for people who will never know his name. And you," she pointed at Richard, "you've been calling him dead weight." Richard's face had gone pale, the man who always had something to say, who never backed down from an argument, who ruled family gatherings with his opinions and judgments, was speechless. Marcus's father, David, stood up slowly, his own face a mask of confusion and dawning understanding. "Son, is this true? Are you really?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus looked around the table at his family, really looked at them for perhaps the first time in years. He saw his mother's tears, his father's shock, his cousin's amazement, his aunt's guilt. And he saw Richard, deflated and small in his chair, the weight of his words finally hitting him. "I can't." Marcus started, then stopped. The words were automatic, the response drilled into him by years of training and operational security. But looking at Emma's fierce protectiveness, her willingness to burn bridges to defend him, he felt something shift inside his chest. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's true." The admission hit the room like a second shockwave. Melissa gasped. Jake swore under his breath. Sarah started crying in earnest now, reaching across the table toward her son. "Marcus, honey, why didn't you tell us?" "Because I couldn't," he said, and for the first time in years his voice carried some of the authority that his teammates knew well. "Because the nature of what I do requires secrecy. Because knowing puts you at risk. Because..." He looked at Richard, who was staring at his plate as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "Because it's easier to let people think you're a failure than to watch them struggle with the weight of what you actually do. Emma sat down hard in her chair, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. "I'm sorry," she said to Marcus. "I know. You didn't want me to say anything, but I couldn't watch it anymore. I couldn't watch him hurt you, when you've already been hurt so much." The room was quiet, except for the sound of rain and muffled sobs. Marcus felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that battlefield injuries had never made him feel. But he also felt something else, a lightness, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. "How long have you known?" he asked Emma. "About a year," she admitted. "I saw some of your gear when I helped you move apartments. And Tony at the shop, he let something slip once about your deployments. I put it together." Marcus nodded. He'd always known Emma was too smart to fool indefinitely. Richard finally looked up, his face a study in conflicted emotions. I had no idea, Marcus. If I had known ... You would have what?" Marcus asked, and there was steel in his voice. "Now, treated me with basic human respect, not insulted me in front of my family. The fact that I serve my country doesn't change who I am as a person, Uncle Richard. It just changes how you see me." The truth of that statement settled over the table like falling snow. Richard opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he had nothing to say. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of revelations and reckonings. In the space of 5 minutes, everything had changed. The family dynamics that had been set in stone for years had shifted irreversibly. Marcus was no longer the family failure, the source of disappointment and concern. He was something else, entirely something they were all still trying to understand. But as Marcus looked around the table, at his family's shocked faces, he realized that the hardest part wasn't over. Now came the questions, the explanations, slow process of rebuilding relationships on a foundation of truth instead of carefully constructed lies. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice was whispering about classified information, operational security, and the protocols he'd just shattered by allowing Emma's revelation to stand uncorrected. The real reckoning was just beginning. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a crystalline silence that seemed to amplify every breath. In the dining room, Marcus stared at his untouched plate, the weight of exposure settling over him like a familiar burden. He'd carried classified secrets through hostile territories. He maintained cover stories under interrogation, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His family staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. His mother was the first to break the silence. "Marcus, sweetheart, how long have you been?" "6 years," he said quietly. "I enlisted right after high school graduation, but I didn't tell anyone. I let you all think I was just taking a gap year, figuring things out." David leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly. "But the training, the time away, we thought you were just ... lost." Marcus almost smiled at that. Lost. If only it were that simple. Basic training was in San Diego, then advanced training, selection, more specialized training. It takes years to become operational, years of being away, of not being able to explain where I was or what I was doing. "SEAL training," Jake said, the words carrying a weight of understanding. "Jesus, Marcus, that's intense stuff." "Bud S has a 90% dropout rate," Marcus said, unconsciously straightening in his chair. "But it's just the beginning. Hell Week is nothing compared to what comes after if you make it through." Emma watched her brother carefully. She'd seen hints of this man before, the way he carried himself, when he thought no one was looking. The alertness that never quite left his eyes, the controlled way he moved through space. Now, with his secret exposed, she could see the soldier, emerging from behind the careful mask of the struggling civilian. "Those disappearances," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where were you really going?" Marcus hesitated. Even now, even with his cover blown, the instinct to protect operational security ran deep. "I can't give you specifics, but Afghanistan, mostly. Syria. Other places that don't make the news." The room absorbed this information in stunned silence. Richard, who had been unusually quiet since Emma's revelation, finally spoke. "When you say other places, I mean places where admitting American forces are present could destabilize international relations, Marcus said flatly. Places where the work we do keeps threats from reaching American soil, but where our presence is officially denied. Sarah reached across the table, her fingers just touching Marcus's hand. You've been... ... Were you ever hurt? Marcus looked down at their joined hands, his mother's soft skin against his scarred knuckles. How could he explain the injuries, the ones that showed and the ones that didn't? The shrapnel scars hidden under his shirt, the rebuilt shoulder that ached in cold weather, the concussion that still gave him headaches 2 years later. Sometimes, he said simply. That's why you moved back to Chicago, Emma said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. Last year, when you said you wanted to be closer to family, you were recovering from something. Marcus's silence was answer enough. What happened? David asked, his voice tight with concern. For a long moment, Marcus didn't respond. In his mind, he was back in the Hindu Kush Mountains, the night sky alive with tracer fire. The mission that had gone sideways, the teammate who hadn't made it to the extraction point, the medal that sat in his apartment drawer because wearing it felt like claiming credit for surviving when better men hadn't. ID, he said finally. Improvised explosive device. My team was. We were extracting a high-value target when we hit a secondary device. He paused, the memories washing over him like tide. I was unconscious for 3 days. Severe concussion. Internal bleeding, damaged shoulder. My teammate Rodriguez stopped, unable to finish. Emma's hand found his other hand, squeezing gently. She didn't need him to finish the sentence to understand. Rodriguez didn't make it home, Marcus continued, his voice barely audible. He had a wife, 2 kids, little girl who just started kindergarten, and I'm the one who got to come back. The weight of survivor's guilt hung heavy in the room. This was the burden Marcus carried, the real reason he struggled to connect with civilian life. Not just the physical injuries, but the psychological weight of loss, of responsibility, of carrying on when others couldn't. Marcus, Richard said. Suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know what to say. I've been such an ass. You didn't know, Marcus replied, though there was little warmth in his voice. That's just it, Richard continued, standing up from his chair. I shouldn't have needed to know. The way I've treated you, the things I've said that was about my own prejudices, my own narrow definition of success. Military service or not, you didn't deserve that. Marcus studied his uncle's face, seeing genuine remorse there. Success isn't just about money, Uncle Richard. It's not about the size of your house or the model of your car. Some of the most successful people I know died in places whose names you'll never hear, protecting freedoms you'll never think about. Richard flinched as if struck. You're right. God, you're absolutely right, and I've been too blind to see it. Hardest part, Marcus continued, isn't the deployments or the danger. It's coming home to people who think you're broken or directionless, or just marking time until you figure out what you want to do with your life. It's sitting at family dinners and being called dead weight when you've spent the last 6 years, carrying the weight of things that would break most people. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Around the table, his family members absorbed the full impact of what they'd missed, what they'd misunderstood, what they'd failed to see. The garage where you work, Jake said slowly. That's Slaney's. A veteran too? Marcus nodded. Marine. Iraq veteran. He understands why I can't commit to a regular schedule. Why I sometimes need space. Why loud noises make me jumpy. He doesn't ask questions when I disappear for months, and he doesn't make me explain why I wake up screaming sometimes. Sarah gasped softly. You have nightmares? PTSD is common among special operations personnel, Marcus said clinically, as if discussing someone else's condition. The VA has programs, counseling, medication, but the hardest part is the isolation, feeling like you can't talk to the people closest to you because they wouldn't understand. But we want to understand, Linda said desperately. If you had just told us ... and say what? Marcus's voice carried an edge of frustration now. That I've killed people, that I've seen things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. But sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if the intelligence that led to a mission was wrong, if the people I'm fighting are actually the bad guys. He shook his head. There's a reason we don't talk about it, Aunt Linda. Some burdens aren't meant to be shared. Emma squeezed his hand tighter. But some burdens are too heavy to carry alone. Marcus looked at his sister. Lily looked at her. At 25, she was becoming an exceptional nurse. Someone who understood suffering and healing in ways the rest of the family didn't. She'd seen him at his worst moments over the past year, had somehow intuited that his struggles went deeper than simple career confusion. How did you really figure it out? He asked her. Emma smiled sadly. Remember when you helped me move last? Spring, I saw you check every window, every door, every potential entry point before you'd even sit down. You cleared the apartment like you were expecting enemy contact, and the way you arranged the furniture, always keeping sightlines clear. Never sitting with your back to an open space. She paused. Nursing school teaches you to observe behavior patterns. Your patterns weren't those of a lost 20-something. They were those of someone trained to stay alive in dangerous situations. Marcus felt a mixture of pride and concern. His sister had excellent instincts, but those same instincts might put her at risk if she ever learned too much about his actual missions. There's more, isn't there? David asked quietly. Things you still can't tell us? Marcus nodded. There always will be. That's the nature of classified work. But he looked around the table at his family, seeing them with new eyes. Maybe I can find a way to let you know when I'm deploying, when I'm safe, when I'm coming home. Maybe I can stop pretending to be someone I'm not. What about your cover? Emma asked. Won't this compromise your security? Probably, Marcus admitted. SEAL team operations are changing. We're not as deep undercover as we used to be. And honestly, carrying this secret has been almost as hard as the missions themselves. Richard, who had been standing by his chair since his apology, slowly walked around the table toward Marcus. I owe you more than an apology, he said. I owe you a debt of gratitude that I can never repay. And I owe you the respect I should have been showing all along. He extended his hand not for a handshake, but in a gesture of formal respect. Marcus looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then stood and clasped it firmly. Your service, Richard said, the words carrying weight that the standard phrase rarely held. Marcus nodded, accepting the gesture, if not quite ready to forgive completely. Thank you for saying that. As the two men released their handshake, the room seemed to exhale collectively. The immediate crisis had passed, but everyone understood that they were now in uncharted territory. 6 years of carefully maintained lies had been stripped away in a single evening, leaving them all to figure out how to move forward. The grandfather clock chimed 9 o'clock, the sound echoing through the house like a bell marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in the same studio apartment that his uncle had once dismissed as a shoebox. But everything felt different now. The morning sun streamed through windows that he no longer needed to keep constantly covered, and, for the first time in months, he'd slept through the night without waking to phantom explosions. The apartment was small, it was true. But it was clean and efficient, a reflection of military discipline rather than civilian failure. The few pieces of furniture were positioned with tactical awareness. But now he could acknowledge that aspect of himself, instead of pretending it was coincidence. On the kitchen counter sat a phone that had been ringing more frequently since Thanksgiving. His family finally reaching out instead of waiting for him to make contact. Emma knocked on his door at exactly 1,100 hours, a timing precision that no longer seemed accidental to either of them. Ready for this? She asked as he opened the door, holding up a large shopping bag. Marcus smiled, the expression coming easier now than it had in years. As ready as I'll ever be. They were preparing for another family gathering, but this one was different. It was David's 60th birthday, and for the first time since his enlistment, Marcus was attending as himself, not the carefully constructed persona of a directionless young man, but as Navy SEAL Petty Officer First Class Marcus Thompson. Emma had brought civilian clothes that actually fit properly, clothes that could accommodate his broader shoulders and more athletic build without looking like he was trying to hide his physical condition. For years, he'd deliberately worn ill-fitting clothes to downplay his obvious fitness, another layer of his cover story. The family's been different since Thanksgiving, Emma said as she helped him sort through the clothes. Better, different. Dad's been reading everything he can find about Navy SEALs drives Mom crazy because he keeps sharing random military facts at dinner. Marcus chuckled. What kind of facts? Did you know that SEAL stands for sea, air, and land? Did you know that the trident symbol represents Neptune's power over the sea? Emma mimicked their father's enthusiastic voice. He's like a kid with a new obsession. He's trying to understand, Marcus said, and there was warmth in his voice. That means something. Emma's expression grew more serious. What about Uncle Richard? Have you talked to him since? Marcus nodded. He called last week, wanted to meet for coffee. He paused, remembering the awkward but sincere conversation. He's been doing research too, but different research. He's been looking into veteran support organizations, ways he could contribute. Apparently he wants to hire more veterans at his construction company. That's actually really good. It is. He's not just feeling guilty. He's trying to do something constructive with that guilt. Marcus selected a navy blue sweater that actually fit his frame properly. He also apologized to Tony at the garage. Went down there in person to thank him for giving me work that accommodated my situation. Emma smiled. Tony must have loved that. Tony said it was the first time a civilian ever thanked him for hiring veterans, instead of asking why we need special accommodations. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. It made me realize how much I'd been underestimating our family. I thought they couldn't handle the truth, but maybe I just never gave them the chance. They finished preparing in comfortable silence, both of them aware that this gathering would be another test. The immediate shock of the Thanksgiving revelation had passed, but now came the harder work of rebuilding relationships on a foundation of honesty rather than carefully maintained lies. The birthday party was at his parents' house, the same suburban Chicago home where Marcus had grown up. But as he walked through the front door, he noticed things he'd never paid attention to before, rather things he'd trained himself not to notice. His father had hung an American flag by the front door sometime in the past 3 weeks. It was positioned correctly, displayed with obvious care and respect. Marcus. His mother enveloped him in a hug that was different from her usual worried embraces. This hug carried relief, joy, and a kind of proud protectiveness. You look good, sweetheart. You look lighter. She was right. The weight of constant deception had been enormous, and its absence was still surprising to him. He could make eye contact without worrying about what people might see there. He could move naturally instead of deliberately suppressing his training. He could be present in conversations instead of constantly monitoring his own responses. The party was smaller than Thanksgiving, just immediate family, but the dynamics were completely different. Jake approached him with genuine curiosity rather than condescending concern, asking thoughtful questions about military life without prying into classified details. Melissa, the youngest cousin, looked at him with undisguised hero worship that was both flattering and slightly uncomfortable. So when you were deployed, Jake said as they stood around the kitchen island, were you actually in combat situations, or was it more support stuff? Marcus considered how to answer. Both. SEAL teams handle a variety of missions: direct action, special reconnaissance, counterterrorism operations, training foreign military units. The nature of the work varies depending on current operational needs. It felt strange to use his real vocabulary, to speak with the precision and authority that came naturally to him, instead of the vague, uncertain manner he'd cultivated as a cover. But it also felt right. David joined their conversation, carrying a beer and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Marcus, I've been reading about the training pipeline. Is it true that Hell Week is 5.5 days with only 4 hours of sleep total? 4 hours if you're lucky, Marcus confirmed. Most classes get less. It's designed to test your mental resilience as much as your physical capabilities. The instructors want to see who quits when things get truly difficult. How many people make it through? Of the men who start Bud S, maybe 10 to 15% eventually become SEALs. It's not just about physical strength, it's about mental toughness, team cohesion, and the ability to perform complex tasks under extreme stress. Emma watched this exchange with satisfaction. For the first time in years, Marcus was engaging fully with family conversations. sharing his knowledge and experience instead of deflecting questions. The difference was remarkable. Richard arrived fashionably late, as always, but his demeanor was markedly different. Gone was the swagger and casual dominance that had characterized his previous family interactions. Instead, he approached Marcus with something that looked remarkably like respect. "Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. I know things have been complicated between us." "They have," Marcus agreed, shaking his uncle's hand. "But complicated doesn't mean irreparable." Richard nodded gratefully. "I wanted you to know that I've been thinking a lot about what you said at Thanksgiving. About success. About what really matters. I've started volunteering with a veterans organization, Downtown Wounded Warriors. They're helping me understand things I should have understood years ago." This was news to Marcus. "What kind of volunteering?" "Administrative work, mostly. Helping with paperwork, coordinating services, grant applications, but also just ... listening. Learning about what veterans face when they come home." Richard's voice grew quiet. "Learning about the kind of sacrifices people make that guys like me never even think about." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A loosening of resentment he'd carried for years. His uncle was making a genuine effort to understand, to grow, to become better. That was more than many people would do when confronted with their own prejudices. "That's good work," Marcus said. Simply, they need support. The party continued around them, but it felt fundamentally different from previous family gatherings. Instead of Marcus being the source of worried whispers and disappointed glances, he was included in conversations, asked for his opinions, treated as the competent adult he'd always been. The relief was overwhelming. Later, as the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself alone with his father on the back porch. David was staring out at the yard where Marcus had played as a child, his expression thoughtful. "I keep thinking about all the times I worried about you," David said without preamble. "All the conversations your mother and I had about how to help you find direction, how to motivate you to do something with your life." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You were out there risking everything for your country, and we thought you needed career counseling?" Marcus leaned against the porch railing. "You couldn't have known. I made sure you couldn't know. But I should have trusted you more. Should have given you credit for being the man we raised you to be, instead of assuming you'd lost your way." David turned to face his son. "I'm proud of you, Marcus, not just for your service, but for the way you've handled all of this. The way you've protected us while protecting your mission. That takes a special kind of strength." The words hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. He'd craved his father's respect for so long, had carried the weight of perceived disappointment for years. Hearing those words now felt like a wound finally healing. "Thanks, Dad. That ... means a lot." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the late afternoon sun paint the yard in shades of gold and amber. Finally, David spoke again. "What happens now? Is your service, I mean? Do you keep deploying?" Marcus considered the question. "Carefully for now, yes. But I'm also thinking about transition planning. Maybe in a few years when I've completed my current obligation, there are opportunities in federal law enforcement, private security, consulting work that could use my skills. And you could stay local. More local than I am now anyway." Marcus smiled at his father, realizing that having a support system matters more than I thought it did. Having people who know who I really am, who I can talk to when things get difficult, that's valuable. David nodded. "We'll be here. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." And Marcus, "No more pretending to be someone you're not. We want to know the real you, even if we can't know everything about what you do." As the sun set over suburban Chicago, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of truly coming home, not just physically, but emotionally. The weight of secrets was being replaced by the strength of authentic relationships. And for the first time since his enlistment, he could envision a future where his military service and his family life weren't separate, conflicting worlds. Inside the house, he could hear Emma laughing at something Jake said, could hear his mother telling Richard about her book club, could hear Melissa practicing her college interview answers with Linda. Normal family sounds from a family that finally knew who he really was. The burden of being a secret warrior was heavy. But the burden of being unknown by the people who mattered most had been heavier still. As Marcus Thompson walked back into his father's house, he carried himself with the bearing of a man who no longer had to choose between his duty and his family. For the first time in 6 years, he was home in every sense of the word.